Whether as testaments to ingenuity or to the imagination, big structures leave their monumental mark on mankind.
The scale of it is just stupefying. Think of it as building 355-story buildings and then burying them underwater.
It's kind of like a backyard satellite dish on steroids, but it's taken a lot of steroids.
If it's really big, it's probably really important.
From mega buildings to giant ships to jumbo attractions. Find out what makes bigger better as we count down the ultimate 10 biggest structures. Why build big? To set free the imagination? To perform an important function? Or simply to attract attention?
North Atlantic civilization has something of a cult of size because of the belief in progress. Bigger is better, or that we will move ahead somehow.
Big structure number 10 celebrates the turn of the century. Towering 450 feet above the Thames River, the London Eye, the world's biggest spinning structure, was built to celebrate the year 2000.
Building big things at the end of a millennium, I think, in a certain way expresses the aspirations of people for bigger and better things in the future.
The London Eye was inspired by great structures of the past, like the very first observation wheel built by George Ferris for the Chicago World Expo of 1893. And like its predecessor, the London Eye is keeping natives and visitors entertained and awed. 100 feet taller than Big Ben and weighing a whopping 1,600 tons, it's twice the size of the wheel built by Ferris, but 3 times lighter and much more comfortable.
There's 32 capsules, each of which will hold up to 25 people. They're fully glazed, they're air-conditioned in the summer, heated in the winter, very, very comfortable. And from these capsules, they will see the most spectacular views of London.
But assembling and putting up a wheel this size required new technology and a lot of imagination. The parts were sent up the River Thames by barge, and the wheel was assembled in a flat position, lying on temporary platforms on the river. Lifting it into an upright position was a major challenge. The wheel stood precariously above the river for a week before being gradually winched up to its final position. The glass capsules were attached, but safety concerns prevented London's spinning sensation from welcoming passengers on board for the Millennium celebration. But as London entered the new year, the wheel remained the center of attention, and a month later, it took its first passengers for a spin. The London Eye will last for years to come as a monument to the new millennium. And this earns it the number 10 spot in our countdown. Floating in at number 9, a massive entertainment playground makes the world's oceans its kingdom. Taller than Niagara Falls and too wide to fit through the Panama Canal, the Grand Princess is the largest floating entertainment complex in the world.
A huge cruise ship is, by definition, a kind of fantasy island of activities. And the infrastructure is really the hull of the boat, which carries all of these different activities.
The Grand Princess is over 200 feet high and 900 feet long.
The first time I saw Grand Princess was in the yard where it was being constructed, and I could not see the 2 ends of the ship in my peripheral vision. Looking up, it just looked like it just kept going and going and going. So it was a staggering sight.
The Grand Princess is a giant leap from the cruise ships of the early 1900s. Ships 100 feet smaller, but considered massive at the time.
In the past, a sea voyage was undertaken only as a means of reaching a destination abroad, with the fear of seasickness and cramped quarters on a long, dreary voyage. Today, travel on great liners is one of the most enjoyable experiences.
But travel on the Grand Princess is an even grander experience. The massive ship has 4 pools, a wedding chapel, 3 restaurants, the biggest floating casino, and a disco suspended 150 feet above the water. For the 1,500 crew members, feeding and providing for the 2,600 passengers is no small task. The laundry facilities churn out more than 4.5 million clean sheets a year, while chefs cook up a storm on the high seas. Although leisure is a priority, a ship this big has to be designed with safety in mind too, so that no one is left behind or lost aboard this giant vessel. Every passenger is issued a magnetic ID card called an A-Pass.
Anytime the passenger goes off, they swipe the card, as do our crew members, so at any point in time, we know who is on the ship or off the ship.
And with its double hull and 6 diesel engines, the Grand Princess is virtually unstoppable.
If you lost power, there's still yet again another power supply to maintain movement. You're never going to go dark in the water, dead in the water.
So far, over 150,000 people have sailed the seas aboard this gigantic cruise liner. But will another ship sail in to dwarf the monumental Grand Princess?
We have reached a size which is the optimum size to be able to cruise and still enter most of the ports. I think this is the largest ships you will see for a while.
That's why it cruises in at number 9 in our countdown. Our number 8 biggest structure carries a heavy responsibility and more than 12 million tons of aeronautical engineering on its back. On every space mission, astronauts wave proudly as they make their way to the launch pad, enter the shuttle, and blast off into space.
Sequence start.
But before any of this can happen, the shuttle must make it to the launch pad, and it takes the world's biggest land vehicle to get it there.
Even though it looks like I'm going up the gangplank on some vacation cruise on a big boat, I'm really heading up to the Cab 1 on Crawler Transporter 1.
The only 2 crawler transporters in the world were designed in the 1960s to move the Apollo flight hardware from the hangar to the launch pad. They're still going strong today. Each crawler is 131 feet long and 114 feet wide, weighs 6 million pounds, and moves on 4 double tracks, each 10 feet high and 40 feet long.
If you took and put the center of this truck over home plate, that would be first base, that would be second base, this would be third. This is the muffler, one of 2 that's on the crawler. You don't run down to Midas and pick one of these up.
Even the shoes that make up each belt or track are massive.
This shoe weighs approximately 2,400 pounds. There are 57 of these per belt. It has a 90-pound pin that holds them together.
Traveling at less than a mile per hour, the aptly named crawler takes over 3 hours to reach the launch pad 3 miles away. And it gets terrible gas mileage.
In comparison to a car, with about a 10 or 12 gallon tank, you'll get about 300 miles to it. We average approximately 127 gallons to the mile.
And the crawler's tracks take a toll on the road.
This is the damage that happens when the crawler rolls over a roadway. It weighs about 6 million pounds, and the sheer size of it causes this type of damage.
That's why the crawler has its own private roadway, a road as wide as an 8-lane highway, and solid enough to support its colossal weight. A good driver helps too.
To drive the crawler, you get a feeling where you've got a whole lot of vehicle at your hands. The amount of responsibility, if you think about it, can be overwhelming, but you try not to think about it. There's a total of 7 engineers at present that drive the crawler, and we rotate on shifts. Each engineer will take a turn driving from one roadway or one landmark to another.
And with a 12 million pound load to transport, the drivers rely on the control room to lift and dock the shuttle.
We can pick up 12 million pounds, which is the space shuttle itself and the mobile launch platform, which the shuttle sits on top of, with just the flick of this one switch.
With all systems running and all its giant parts intact, the crawler will continue to play its part in space exploration for years to come. And that's why it earns the number 8 spot in our countdown. Next, a grand temple to transportation that helped to put the big in the Big Apple.
It is not only a testament in terms of size and enormity, but also in terms of life and the life that it brings to New York City.
And find out which building has its own zip code and is more populated than 9 out of 10 cities in the U.S. We're counting down the ultimate 10 biggest structures. Coming in at number 7, what's big, beautiful, and bustles with more than 500,000 people a day?
Grand Central Terminal extends via tunnels all the way from 42nd Street up to 97th Street. Indeed, there are about 33 miles of track. It makes us the largest train terminal in the world.
New York City's Grand Central is also an architectural marvel and a model of efficiency.
As large as it is, everything has a purpose and a reason and is productive here. It wasn't built just for show or just to claim a title. It was necessary. Here in the heart of Manhattan, it was important to have a station that could handle hundreds of thousands of commuters from the suburbs and exurbs.
When it opened in 1913, Grand Central had taken 10 years to build and cost over $700 million in today's dollars. Its 2 levels of electric tracks were built to replace the smoky and congested Grand Central Depot.
Anybody who was going to Chicago or Los Angeles or traveling anywhere in the U.S. was basically coming into Grand Central Terminal.
For years, it was known as the gateway to the nation.
All aboard!
Today, it's still an awesome sight.
The main concourse itself, when you stand there, is 250 feet high. But little do people realize that it is far more than 100 feet deep, one of the deepest cuts in Manhattan.
On the first level below the main concourse, more than 550 trains come and go each day. Keeping them on track is a big responsibility for the traffic controllers.
When I choose a route for a train, I'll select an entrance and an exit, keep everything away from each other, heading in the same direction, nothing coming at each other, and we've been pretty successful at that so far. So.
Every day, over 100,000 passengers disembark from the trains, leaving behind 4 tons of reading material a year. In the main concourse, high ceilings and windows keep the air circulating freely through the terminal.
Right now, we're about 200 feet above Grand Central Terminal, actually standing in one of the glass arch windows. This serves many functions. Not only is it a walkway from one office tower to the next, it also allows light to come in through the windows, through the glass floor, and to illuminate the terminal.
Above the glass walkways shines Grand Central's crowning glory, the star-spangled ceiling. A $4 million restoration completed in 1998 restored Grand Central Terminal's ceiling to its original splendor, although workers left a reminder of the terminal's past.
We did leave one small section uncleaned, and indeed it's hard to imagine that that ceiling was just so bleak and black as it was years ago, but not now. It's the temple to transportation, of excellence of design, that says something great about enormity.
Size, beauty, and efficiency win Grand Central the number 7 spot in our countdown. Inside big structure number 6 beats the military pulse of an entire nation. The Pentagon is the world's largest administrative building and one of the most important. As the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense, it is so large that the U.S. Capitol building could fit in any one of its 5 wedges.
There's another kind of bigness, which is the kind of bigness that you find in a building like the Pentagon. It was built by the military, and everything that the military does really needs to be accountable in some way, form, or shape. And so the Pentagon reflects this very huge organizational structure.
The Pentagon was built in 1941 to consolidate the 17 buildings of the War Department and more efficiently plan for the Second World War that loomed ahead.
General Somerville, the Chief of Army Construction at the time, tasked the Chief Architect, George Edwin Bergstrom, to come up with a design. It had to house 30,000 employees, it had to be done cheaply, and it had to be done quickly.
5 days later, the unique plans were on Somerville's desk.
The problem with the shape and, of course, consolidating the forces was a security issue. One large strike could impact most of your military establishment, and so that was weighed very heavily. But Franklin Roosevelt liked the idea and agreed to consolidate the armed forces in the Pentagon.
And 60 days later, construction began. But the building's location generated concern.
Because the Pentagon was built essentially on a swamp, it was critical that it be supported by thousands and thousands of piles. 41,492 columns support the Pentagon. The use of steel was kept to a minimum because we needed to preserve it for the war effort. And in actual construction, they saved about 45,000 tons of steel. That was enough to build an entire battleship.
Almost a mile in circumference, the Pentagon sprawls over 29 acres. So for the tens of thousands of people walking through the maze of corridors each day, getting around isn't always easy.
I used to get lost frequently the first time around.
You'll pass the drinking fountain a couple times, going in circles. When you've done that, it's time to pull into an office and get some instructions.
And the Pentagon's pedestrians must even look out for oncoming traffic.
The Pentagon is traversed by close to 150 electric vehicles on any given day, so it is very much like a small town in terms of traffic and a road system.
There are 17.5 miles of hallways running through the Pentagon, but it takes no more than 7 minutes to get to any point in the building on foot. This self-sufficient city offers stores, its own metro stop, and right in the center, a giant courtyard where employees can relax.
Like New York City, the Pentagon too has its own central park. We call it the Center Courtyard. It's exactly 5 acres, and it's the largest no-hat, no-salute zone in the free world for our military forces. They don't have to salute another officer in this courtyard. They don't have to wear a hat, as you can see.
During the Cold War, bare-headed employees sitting at the Courtyard Cafe were right in the bullseye for Russian missiles.
We had determined that the Russians had 2 missiles directly targeted for that Center Courtyard Cafe. They were convinced that that was where the highest level meetings were held. But it is and always was just a cafe, and the only secrets kept there, I understand, are the ingredients to the Pentagon hot dogs.
Today, the Pentagon is getting a different kind of attention, a renovation that will cost $2.5 billion.
Because of the nature of the missions that take place in the Pentagon, renovating is like converting a black and white television to a color television without ever turning the set off.
As renovations continue well into the 21st century, the Pentagon will remain the nerve center of America's military machine, making its mark at number 6 on our list. Next, the heavyweight of all aircraft carriers and a North Sea superstructure with 4 legs each as tall as the Eiffel Tower.
It's such a colossal scale, you have to recalibrate your entire sense of size.
We're counting down the ultimate 10 biggest structures. Around the world, massive aircraft carriers patrol the seas ready to fight, protect, and keep the peace. But a new high-tech floating fortress, 20 stories high, has sailed in to stake its claim to the number 5 spot on our countdown.
Captain, the ship is manned and ready.
The USS Harry S. Truman is the newest and most modern addition to America's fleet of supercarriers that includes the USS Vincent, the Stennis, and the Nimitz, the biggest floating vessels on the planet.
From a visual point of view and a utility point of view, it's more like a big single-purpose tool. You know, it's probably the hugest tool on the surface of the Earth, if you think about it.
With its 97,000 tons rising 60 feet above the water, the USS Truman provides a 4.5-acre floating deck and storage for weapons.
Imagine the Empire State Building uprooted and put on its side. And that would be a pretty good approximation of the size of these ships.
Early carriers were nothing more than merchant ships with flight decks placed on top. But today's carriers require years of assembly.
An aircraft carrier the size of the Truman is a national investment. And the construction is a national asset that can only be accomplished in certain shipyards.
It took 5 years and $4.5 billion before the Truman was fully operational. Powered by 2 nuclear reactors, the supercarriers can go 20 years without stopping. But on board this city at sea, the 6,000-plus crew needs regular refueling.
You're replenished on a regular basis from our fast resupply ships. It can be resupplied with anything it needs at sea and stay at sea indefinitely.
The supercarrier's living and workspaces include 17 levels of decks, a hangar for more than 80 aircraft, and a maze of storage for ammunition and supplies.
It's very daunting because the new carriers have got so many passageways that it's almost like looking down a mirror. It seems to go on forever and ever.
Towering above it all is an imposing structure called the island.
Deck control, you're only going to need to shoot one E2.
In the island are housed most of your command and control facilities. That's where the handler who controls the airplane movement is. That's where the captain controls the ship from.
A daily choreography takes place on board to ensure the seamless functioning of this fortress at sea.
Dominance of its presence should convince anyone who sees it that this is something that means business. Something that's done on that scale is amazing. It's awe-inspiring.
Which is why the USS Harry S. Truman lands at number 5. Big structure number 4 weighs more than 10 supercarriers, and it pumps enough natural gas to provide energy to 30 million homes for the next 50 years. The Troll platform rises 1,200 feet from the ocean floor, and it is tapped into Europe's richest natural gas field. But it's how it got to this spot 40 miles from the Norwegian coast that earns it a place in our countdown.
It's right smack in the middle of the North Sea. And this meant that whatever we wanted to put in place there had to be constructed at shore in Norway and then be floated out and installed offshore.
First, engineers had to build the hollow base that would anchor the Troll platform to the seabed. Using over 700,000 tons of cement, workers created a structure 100 feet high, spanning 3 football fields in area. It was then towed to a nearby fjord, where the massive construction continued. On the fjord, 4 towering shafts were built on the base. 6 feet thick and 1,000 feet tall, the hollow towers were built to support a deck which weighed over 22,000 tons. In order to place the deck onto the towers, builders filled the hollow shafts with water. The structure sank below the surface, and the deck was then floated over it. With only 3 feet of space between the deck and the platform, it was a risky maneuver. Engineers then pumped air into the concrete shafts, and the giant Troll, now complete, lifted out of the sea. Next, this colossal structure rising 550 feet above the water had to be towed out to a gas field 40 miles away, the equivalent of towing the Empire State Building 200 nautical miles. 8 130,000 horsepower tugs pulled the concrete giant, and 2 tugs in the back served as rudders as Troll made its way through the narrow fjords. With only 30 feet of clearance in some areas, Troll had to avoid the rocks below, or the entire structure would collapse. After traveling at 1 mile an hour for 6 days, the Troll platform reached its final destination. It was sunk into the seabed above the Troll gas field, and over 1,000 feet of this industrial wonder disappeared from view forever. But for anyone standing inside one of the structure's hollow legs deep below the North Sea, Troll offers a spectacular sight.
It's just like being in a magnificent cathedral, because you can see up and up and up.
And as a marvel of engineering, the Troll platform wins the number 4 spot in our countdown. Next, a tunnel so long it connects 2 countries by sea.
If you have the opportunity to ride through the tunnel and appreciate the breadth of this achievement, big is beautiful.
And coming up, 2 islands that were entirely flattened and linked together to create the largest airport terminal in the world. we're counting down the ultimate 10 biggest structures. It took 10 lives, 6 years, and $17 billion to build ultimate structure number 3. It's one of the most challenging transportation systems ever built. The world's longest undersea tunnel stretches 24 miles beneath the ocean floor and unites Europe and Great Britain, 2 land masses separated for 8,000 years. For centuries, engineers have dreamt of ways to link Great Britain with the European continent. Ideas have ranged from bridges to futuristic tunnels. Aside from the engineering difficulties, the British feared that any link to the continent could bring invasions and disease. But in the 1980s, Great Britain and France at last agreed on a plan to join the 2 countries. Linking Calais, France to Folkestone, England, the planned tunnel would stretch 24 miles under the English Channel.
The scale of it is just stupefying. If you think of it as building 300 55-story buildings and then taking them and not only burying them underground, but burying them underwater, and then arranging to have a subway run through the resulting tunnel, you get some idea of the complexity. The English Channel Tunnel is basically 2 tunnels. There are 2 running tunnels that run side by side. Between them, there's a smaller tunnel, that's the service tunnel. And that's for ferrying crews out to the middle in case of an accident. That's the escape route.
In 1987, British and French teams started digging towards each other, but difficult months lay ahead. To build the tunnel, workers had to follow a narrow layer of rock called chalk marl, soft enough for the equipment to cut through and sufficiently waterproof to avoid disaster.
It's because they had to follow that single level of good digging ground that they went in some places to about 80 feet and sometimes as deep as 150 feet below the seabed.
Giant boring machines were specially designed to cut across the channel.
They're monster machines. The smallest one that they used to do the service tunnel was as long as 2 football fields and weighed 650 tons. And that was the little one. The bigger ones were considerably larger.
The resulting debris fell onto a conveyor belt and was then carried out of the tunnel. Meanwhile, cranes connected to the giant tunnel boring machines positioned the concrete wedges that formed the tunnel wall. But leaks on both sides constantly challenged the crews and caused delays.
Because of the size of this project and the duration, the fact that it was going on for years, they were crushed by this behemoth.
For 3 years, the determined British and French teams dug towards each other, and by 1990, it was finally time for the first tunnel breakthrough.
Everybody had been very confident that the machines were going to link up until about 24 hours before the link up was supposed to take place. And then these people began to worry, well, what if we don't meet up? And so when the link up finally came, there was a great, great sigh of relief.
When the 3 tunnels were complete, over 60 miles of track were laid down for the trains that would shuttle under the channel. By 1993, one of the 20th century's most impressive engineering achievements was finally ready to open.
The French were very happy when the tunnel opened. To them, it's a great public work. I think the only reservation they ever had about it was that the fact that it was a tunnel and you couldn't see it.
It's hidden beneath the channel, but its impact is visible to all.
Britain is much more strongly linked, I think, to the fate of Europe now. I think that the tunnel is one of the great projects of our time, or perhaps any other time.
Which is why the Channel Tunnel wins 3rd place on our countdown. At number 2, a titanic flight terminal that connects the Far East to the 4 corners of the world. With over 1.5 million square feet of floor space, Hong Kong International is the largest airport terminal ever built. The construction of the new airport was one of the largest earth-moving and dredging operations ever undertaken. Over 3/4 of the airport site was scraped up from the ocean floor. And the islands of Chek Lap Kok and Lam Kai were completely flattened to create a runway complex nearly 4 miles long and 2 miles wide. Today, anyone who arrives at Hong Kong International is treated to a stunning futuristic terminal.
It's a very modernized airport compared to other airports.
It's a huge place. It's a really impressive first impression of Hong Kong.
The shape of the enormous terminal makes it easy for aircraft and the 80,000 daily passengers to come and go. When passengers arrive, thousands of pieces of luggage are taken from the aircraft to loading trucks and placed on a maze of conveyor belts and security scanners underneath the terminal. They end up on the carousel in a record 12 minutes.
We do have a very sophisticated system within the terminal, which is 100% automated. During peak time, we handle about 5,000 bags each hour.
The 4,500 tons of cargo that arrive at Hong Kong International each day enter the world's largest cargo terminal. Sprawling over 800,000 square feet, Super Terminal 1 is fully automated and sorts and stores shipments from around the globe. And with more than 500 flights taking off and landing at Hong Kong Airport each day, the control center is the operations hub of the airport. Built with an eye to the future, Hong Kong International will only get busier. By 2040, it should be able to cater to 87 million passengers a year, over 10 million more than Atlanta International, the busiest airport in the U.S.
The fact that the airport is so huge means it's really an investment in the future. I would say make a mega structure making the world a much smaller place is a very nice way to put it.
And as a blueprint for airports to come, Hong Kong International lands at number 2. Next, find out what may be our number 1 biggest hope of finding signs for intelligent life elsewhere.
What I do for a living these days, which is try and eavesdrop on aliens, and having a very large antenna is an advantage.
We're counting down the ultimate 10 biggest structures. All giant marvels leave a mark on the world, but the sheer size of our number 1 biggest structure may one day help us unlock the mysteries of the universe and discover whether or not we are in it alone. The Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico houses the world's largest radio telescope. It is a machine of astounding size, and its incredible power has enabled scientists to make discoveries about our universe at an unprecedented speed. Each year, the most renowned astronomers from around the globe come here to study galaxies, pulsars, and quasars, and to listen for signs of intelligent life outside our solar system.
This is one instance where bigger really is better. A bigger antenna means you can pick up fainter signals. And in the case of radio astronomy, or what I do for a living these days, which is try and eavesdrop on aliens, having a very large antenna is an advantage. It's equivalent to being able to pick up a cell phone at the distance of Jupiter. That gives you some idea of the enormous sensitivity of this thing.
Just how big is the Arecibo telescope?
Arecibo is large. It's 1,000 feet across. It's a big circular antenna. It's like kind of like a backyard satellite dish on steroids, but it's taken a lot of steroids. I worked out once. It would hold about 3 or 4 billion scoops of ice cream.
This giant telescope was built in 1963 in northern Puerto Rico, far from sources of radio interference and close to the equator, where more of the sky could be studied.
So here I am at the center of this very, very large reflector. You can see how large it is because you can see how tiny I am. The big reflector, the dish, is simply a very large mirror. It is used to reflect the very weak radio waves that arrive from many places in our universe.
As the Earth spins, the giant dish scans the sky above it. Its 40,000 aluminum panels make up a massive antenna that hangs above a giant sinkhole.
It's hanging from a set of cables. This whole thing is actually not sitting on the ground as it might look when you look from far away.
In this natural greenhouse, cables rising from tree trunks hold the 40,000 panels in position.
And in this way, we can make sure that the surface is as good a sphere as it is, because if it isn't, it doesn't reflect very efficiently.
The radio waves that bounce off the massive dish enter the giant dome 450 feet above.
The Gregorian dome, which contains these 2 reflectors that we use to focus the radiation, is a quite large structure. It's more than a 2-story high building.
The dome weighs 800 tons. It's positioned below a platform suspended by heavy cables running from 3 cement towers. To get to the platform, maintenance crews either ride or walk.
Well, this is one way to get up here. It's not as easy as with a cable car. This is a very, very large machine hanging here in the tropical air of Puerto Rico. So there's an enormous amount of maintenance work that needs to be done.
And down in the control room, there's also work to be done, as radio signals received by the giant telescope are turned into data and analyzed.
People who've seen movies like Contact and so forth, they figure that what we're doing is sitting around with earphones on, just waiting for E.T. to phone. That's not the way it is, actually. We're monitoring millions of channels simultaneously. But it's also true that because we're using the world's largest antenna, we pick up signals all the time.
None of them are from aliens yet, but the world's largest radio telescope is our best bet for finding alien life out there. And for all astronomers, it remains the most powerful tool to search and study the universe.
It is a monument to our curiosity. It is really something that we should all be very proud of, because this is something that is very, very human, very significant in terms of what we are and what we can achieve.
Its significance for progress and mankind earns it the #1 spot in our countdown. Big structures have a dramatic impact on our lives, but is bigger really better?
Is bigger better in terms of structures? It all depends on the function that it's performing.
bigger is better when it's well thought out.
Bigger is not better per se necessarily, but as we escalate our population sizes, we will expect big things. So bigger is as bigger does.
The ultimate 10 biggest structures entertain us, transport us across continents and into space, protect us, and offer a bigger view of life and the universe that lies beyond.